even if you think at a cultural level, mainly what humans do for human history is work, like hunting or gathering or farm. That's what we do. Now some of us type, which is a ridiculous job, but that's what we do. And then cultures invented periodic rituals that were celebrations. They didn't come from somewhere. Cultures said, hey, after we're done with the harvest, let's go nuts. All over the world, let's go nuts for a day or a week or whatever it might be. They remind us to punctuate life with some sort of meaning or some sort of celebration, some sort of gathering together to make life different than just the same thing every day.
That's the voice of Michael Norton, the Harold M. Brierly Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School. Before joining HBS, Mike was a fellow at the MIT Media Lab and MIT's Sloan School of Management. He's got some really cool ways to think about human behavior, and we were really, really excited to speak with him.
Really? In case you didn't get that. We wanted to talk to Mike about his new book, The Ritual Effect, From Habit to Ritual, Harness the Surprising Power of Everyday Actions. The book explains that rituals are not just those heavy-handed, incense-burning, group-chanting, ritualized things for religious purposes, though many are, nor are they just the things that we do repeatedly in our lives, because those could probably just habits and routines. They can be small things that we do for our life satisfaction.
However, for something to be a ritual, it needs to animate us. In other words, it needs to matter.
So, Kurt, here's a question for you. Do you brush your teeth before or after you shower?
Well, I typically do it after because yeah.
Okay. And does it matter? In other words, if you did it out of sequence, would you feel just a little off during the day?
Nope. Not at all.
Okay. Okay. So regardless of the sequence, if it does matter to you, groovers, if you're listening to this and you go, oh my God, I could never do it differently. Well, then that's likely a ritual for you. Kurt, for you, it's probably not a ritual.
No.
It's just a routine. But as you noted, for some people, it animates them to make sure that they're brushing their teeth in the proper sequence.
Right. And understand this, that rituals are not just for the ADHD crowd or, those people with OCD, right? So don't go drawing conclusions that because, well, the toothbrushing thing doesn't matter to me, that you aren't a ritual person.
All right.
Think again. Think about this. Does your family maybe celebrate birthday with cake that has candles on it? And does the birthday person have to blow those candles out and make a wish? Would it be weird if you cut the cake without singing the birthday song or blowing those candles out? I don't know. Maybe that's a ritual. Gotcha.
Well, okay, so we think you're going to love our conversation with Mike Norton. And if you do, we'd be grateful if you would just take a minute to give us a quick rating or a review on whatever app you use to listen to Behavioral Grooves. Ratings and reviews fuel the algorithms used by Apple and Spotify and others to recommend this podcast to other people.
We see the listeners are regularly posting wonderful comments on Spotify and Podbean, and we want to thank them.
Yeah, we had some recent comments from Julian Rincon and Fizz Pentiga. And just thank you for your kind words. Please follow the example of Julian and Fizz and share a word or two with us. It costs you zilch, nada, nothing, zero. And it delivers an outsized reward to us. So thanks in advance for your help.
Okay. Back to the episode. This episode of Behavior Grooves.
All right.
In our conversation with Mike, we're going to explore our human condition through the eyes of rituals and how they help and sometimes hinder our experience in the world. And we'll discuss why rituals are important and how they give our lives meaning. We'll state once and for all that the dreaded trust falls and rope courses that your company has required you to do might actually work. They just might.
They might just work. And we'll hear Mike Norton tell us why songwriters and comedians are really the only people on the planet, other than psychologists, who really understand human nature.
Okay. I think maybe you didn't quite say it like that, Tim. I think it was more like, quote, musicians and comedians are the best social scientists in the world if they're good.
Oh, okay. Well, if you had my biases as a songwriter, you might have just heard it differently.
No, it's still a pretty powerful statement. I mean, that's really good. but we don't want to misconstrue what our guests had to say. And with that, I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. And we hope that right now you sit back with a warm cup of your favorite ritual and enjoy our Behavioral Grooves conversation with Michael Norton. Mike Norton, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
It is great to be here. Thank you both.
We are glad to have you, and we need to know right away, coffee or tea?
The answer is neither. The answer is iced coffee.
What?
Distinction there. Distinction. Yeah. So what is it about iced coffee, not the hot coffee?
I think, as I said that, I realized I don't think that I drink hot liquids.
You don't drink hot liquids?
Not on principle, I don't think. I just, reflecting, I don't think I have any in my life for whatever reason. Even hot chocolate, now that I think about it, I'm not a huge fan.
Well, there might be, is there a ritual there possibly? A routine? A habit?
It's got to be something. Or I'm rejecting something. I don't know. Maybe society forced me. So I said, no, I'll have iced. I'm not sure.
There you go. All right. So then I'm sure you get some weird looks in the middle of winter when you're going in and ordering the iced coffee and as opposed to like the warm coffee, right?
Yeah. Particularly living in Massachusetts, most of the year, it's an odd choice. I would say.
Okay. So with that actually kind of leading into the next question, which pizza would you prefer from Regina's in Boston? Sausage and onion or pepperoni and mushroom?
Sausage and onion.
Oh,
for sure.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Not even a hesitation there.
I've been eating sausage and onion pizza at Regina's for literally my entire life. It is, my dad liked that. And I used to also get it with a buddy of mine after college when we were lost in the world kind of thing. And so it has these by the way, I don't order sausage and onion anywhere else.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather have pepperoni or whatever.
Which again is, we can talk about that as we get into the more descriptive parts of the conversation as opposed to the speed round. But I think for now, we'll hold that conversation. Tim, you got the next one.
Mike, do you brush your teeth before you shower or after you shower?
An excellent question. I brush my teeth before I shower.
I love hearing excellent question to a toothbrushing question. That just made my day.
These are the kinds of questions that have animated my career, Tim. The totally pointless questions, but I like to hear people's answers. That's my whole thing.
Okay. See, and again, I would like to know, so if you had to switch that up for you, is that a big deal? Or is it I don't care if I do it before or after, but I tend to do it, one way or the other. I
could definitely do it another order. I know that it doesn't matter. I rationally understand there's no difference in the order of these two things, but I think being in the shower without having brushed my teeth feels to me to be unacceptable. It doesn't feel correct to me, even though I'm sure many people are just fine with it.
So, and we'll talk about this, but that's a part of this ritual aspect and the feeling that comes from what otherwise would be routine or habits. And we'll get into that later. We have this final last speed round question. And see, I told you in prepping for this that the speed rounds aren't always really speedy. So here we go. Is there such a thing as life without a ritual?
I don't know of anyone who would have had a life without ritual of one kind or another. Like most people have gone to a wedding, been in a wedding. Most people have had a birthday cake. If you go broad on ritual, I think it's even people who are very rational and optimizing and all that kind of stuff. Still, we get dragged into them by our friends and our family, even if we don't want anything to do with them,
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we are talking with Mike Norton, author of The Ritual Effect, From Habit to Ritual, Harness the Surprising Power of Everyday Actions. And it is amazing. A fantastic book, by the way, as Tim and I mentioned beforehand. We often rate books by the number of earmarks and underlines that we get in them. And yours is earmarked and underlined vastly. So listeners, please go out there. But Mike, can you tell us first off for our listeners, how do you describe a ritual and why are rituals important?
I think when I started studying ritual, and I think for most of us still, when you hear the word, your mind goes to like men in robes with candles chanting in Latin or something like that. And those are fascinating, and people study those, and I've read a lot about them. Totally cool. That's not typically the kind of rituals that I was interested in. I think as a social psychologist, I was interested in people's everyday lives and how rituals played into those. And so it's more, as you said, like brushing teeth and taking a shower. People have their morning, they often use the word routine, but when you really start to dive into it, it isn't just that they're doing these things. They're doing them in this order at this particular time. And if they do it in that order, they feel really good about it. And if their kid comes in and disrupts them, they say, I'm going to be off all day now. I don't know what to do. That is getting closer to a ritual, like on the long continuum to people in robes chanting.
Yep.
We're still very, very far away from that, just to be clear. But in the, routine, habit, mundane versus something that has a little more in it, a little more meaning, a little more emotion. When these mundane actions start to matter more than you might think, that's when I think they're starting to have properties of ritual.
Yeah, and so going back to the toothbrush piece, right? So, and the shower, you actually did research on that and kind of looking at how people responded. What is it about that emotional response that separates it from your standard routine? Is there a clear distinction from what the research shows, or is it, as you said, is it on that continuum kind of piece?
First off, when I said excellent question, when you asked me toothbrush and shower, I guess what I was doing was saying that I asked an excellent question. So it wasn't, I just realized it was completely egotistical
That's perfectly fine.
Absolutely.
Fascinating insight I've had is basically what I just said.
Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, when we ask people, as you did, are you willing to flip it? First, what order are you doing it, and are you willing to flip it? Well, bizarrely, first, about half of people do it in one order and half do it in the other order, which is just like humans have not figured out the optimal order of these two tasks, which to me is just funny.
Which of course, is first, right?
Yeah. Well, half are wrong, basically.
Exactly. And I think deeply misguided. I think that we can say that.
Yeah.
But to me, the more interesting question, you asked this also, is will you flip them? If you flip them, how will you feel about it? And there again, about half of people say, sure. Couldn't care less, any order, totally fine.
Yeah.
I need to clean my mouth and clean my body. I don't care what order I do it in, just tasks. And other people, about half, say, you can see in their body language, like, I'd rather not. Can I just do it the way that I like to do it? And if you say why, they say things like, I'd feel off all day. I wouldn't feel ready for the day. Or if they do it at night, they say, I wouldn't feel ready for bed. I wouldn't feel like I'd done my thing that I needed to do. And that's when you start to, as soon as you have, what could be more boring than brushing your teeth and showering? We picked them on purpose, right? They're so mundane. Why would you care? And yet half of humans seem to care about the order that they do these. They have positive emotions if they do it correctly, meaning their way. And they have negative emotions if they can't do it their way. And that again is like, how do these really mundane actions get imbued with meaning of I will be off all day is the feeling that this can provoke in us. And that's so interesting to me about rituals is they're very tiny sometimes, and yet they still can produce these big reactions.
Well, and they seem to, you're using the words feelings and emotions a lot when talking about rituals. Can you tell us a little bit more about what distinguishes a ritual from a routine and a habit? Because I think a lot of people tend to think of them as sort of being, well, that's pretty similar, isn't it?
Yes. And one thing that's frustrating when you study this is that two people can be doing the exact same thing. And for one of them, it's a ritual. And for the other one, they couldn't care less. Even if you think about, for example, religious rituals. So if you're going to religious services, if I, as a magical social scientist, look down at, I'm Irish Catholic, so look down at a Catholic mass, everyone's moving in unison. They're kneeling at the right time and sitting and standing. Everyone. For some people, they're there because it's a deep expression of their faith. It's a connection to a shared history. It's a connection to their spirituality. It's one of the most important things in their life. And the person next to them is there because that person made them go.
Exactly.
And they couldn't care less.
Yeah.
But when I look down, I'm sure I could code micro expression, but in general, you can't tell. Yeah. And so I think this is important. And the same with brushing your teeth and showering. For one person, it's a habit, and one, it's a ritual. And what it means is it's frustrating and interesting I guess what I would say. Because it means I really need to ask you, Like, are these actions for you very meaningful or not? And then I can start to dive into how they got that meaning, what emotions they provoke, when and why you use that ritual in your life. What problem are you trying to solve, or what emotion are you trying to get to with this ritual? And that's where the psychology for me comes into it on this, like, well, what's going under the hood when people are engaged in these actions?
You wrote, good habits automate us while good rituals animate us. And I love that, right? Because it does help in kind of differentiating between, that ritual and the routine or the habit that we have. So to what degree do we need more animated lives? In other words, do we need to have more rituals in our lives? Is that a fair question?
I have this thing about habits, which is, let me say very clearly, good habits are great.
Yes.
I just want to be super clear. I'm not like, get rid of all your habits.
We interviewed Wendy Wood, so all right.
Perfect.
There you go. Yeah.
Perfect. I wish I had better habits, and I'm trying to have better habits myself. So just to be super clear, developing good habits is terrific. However, when I think about, if you thought about the next, 40 years of your life, if you had completely perfect habits at every moment of every day, after that 40 years, I think you'd be extremely healthy. But if I said, hey, how interesting was your life? How rich was your life? I think you might say, not so rich, actually. I just ate lettuce the last 40 years. And, I couldn't travel because that might interfere with my exercise routine in the morning. If you're married to someone that has very strong habits, you may have experienced the frustration of this person where you say, hey, let's go grab a beer. And they say, I can't have any carbs. And also it's already 6 p.m. And
Exactly.
So I think that the huge benefits of habits, obviously, and yet they can leave us a little bit dry, a little bit boring, a little bit mundane. And rituals sometimes are the thing that can pull us out of that. Even if you think at a cultural level, mainly what humans do for human history is work. Like hunting or gathering or farm, that's what we do. Now some of us type, which is a ridiculous job, but that's what we do. And then cultures invented periodic rituals that were celebrations. They didn't come from somewhere. Cultures said, hey, after we're done with the harvest, let's go nuts all over the world. Let's go nuts for a day or a week or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
They remind us to punctuate life with some sort of meaning or some sort of celebration, some sort of gathering together to make life different than just the same thing every day. And I think that we do that in our own lives, or we can do that in our own lives by making things a little bit more meaningful than just automaton going through the motions every single day doing the same thing.
You mentioned just a minute ago about this contrast of looking down with the superhuman eye as to all these people doing the same thing, and you said that, if I heard you correctly, that basically it's really just better to ask people. And we just talked to Jeff Wetzler, who is the author of a book called Ask, which is pretty fantastic.
Awesome.
Is asking people a pretty reliable way of actually finding out how they feel about things?
It can be, is what I would say. So certainly we're not always aware of what's driving our behavior. You can see in your coworkers, they think that they're feeling just fine, and you can see that something, really bothering. Or you can see that your kids are quite hungry and that's why they're grumpy, but they don't realize that's why they're grumpy. So for sure we have some access, but we can get it wrong. But if you ask people, why do you do rituals in these different domains in your life? Well, why, or what do you do when you're really nervous? And people say, well, I do this thing. And then I say, well, why did you do that thing? And they say, well, I was trying to calm down.
Mm.
So we have some sense that these rituals are tools, or if, at a wedding.
Yeah.
Why did you do this bizarre thing with an aisle and, the rings and all this kind of, what's going on with that?
Throwing rice.
And
yeah.
all of it, right?
Yeah.
By the way, different cultures throw very different foods at the bride and groom, which is amazing to me, right? Like independently, human cultures were like, we should definitely throw something at them. And then they looked around like, oh, there's some rice, let's throw that at them. But anyway, yeah, I mean.
Fertility takes on, context, right? Whatever is relevant
completely.
in that area. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of like where I come down on it, is that they serve a lot of functions for us. We turn to them in many different situations.
Yeah.
And therefore we are aware on some level that we use these to feel certain ways. Measuring, exactly how effective they are at doing that, that's a separate question. Or maybe another way to think about it is compared to what?
Yeah.
Shouting at myself in the mirror, "You've got this, Mike." Is that better or worse than taking a pill? That's like a different question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But typically when people are doing these things, they know that it's in the service of the emotion that they're trying to get to.
It's interesting. You talked earlier, again, with that viewpoint of looking down at people in the church and saying one person, it's very ritualistic, and the other person, it's not. And one of the really interesting pieces of the book that I found was the rituals in partnerships, in relationships, where one person thought that making that coffee every morning, that they went over and did everything, was a really ritualistic thing and they're doing. And the other person is just like, "Hey, thanks for the coffee." And you showed that there was some...
Why isn't there ice in this?
Why isn't there ice in it? But you showed that there was some really interesting components then that kind of depended on, it showed the relationships quality. Can you talk a little bit about some of that? Yeah.
Sometimes in research, you have findings that are very, very sad.
Yeah.
Let me just preface it with that. So the research led by my colleague Jimena Garcia-Rada, who studies decision-making in couples. Super cool research in general, if you've ever been in a couple. We look to see, so we ask people, in relationships, we usually don't say, do you have a ritual? Because people think of the robes and candles thing. But do you have something that you do with your partner that's special? You do it regularly. It's kind of unique to the two of you. And about 2/3 to 3/4 of couples say, yes, we've got something. And if you look at the couples, so we can separate them and ask them independently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you hear your spouse say you have one and then you say, "Oh yeah, of course." I love doing that.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
Exactly. So when we separate them, we see the good news is mainly people agree. So the majority of couples have a ritual and they both say, "Yes, we have a ritual." Some percent of couples, they both say, "No, we don't have a ritual." Those couples are not as satisfied with their relationship as couples where they both say yes, but at least they agree that it's just coffee, to your point. But the sad couples to me are the one where one person says, "Oh my, we do this wonderful thing every Friday where something, and the other person says, "No."
Yeah.
And those couples luckily they're not less happy than couples who both say no, but there's no benefit. In other words, if one person says yes, it's not like half as good.
Yeah.
It's just nothing. And I think that really shows, to your point, in the context of relationships, consensus has to be there for it to have some kind of meaning or some sort of effect on us.
Yeah.
One of the things that you wrote about also when it comes to couples was this idea of reconciliation. And I was wondering if you could just share a couple comments about that.
Yeah, you just asked me to talk about the saddest finding in all of the research about couples who disagree. Reconciliation is actually one of these delightful stories. They're heartwarming. They make you go, "Oh," I mean, they're really, really great. And I think we see, for example, couples who got divorced and then years and years later get married to the same person again.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you can say, if you make the same mistake twice, it's shame on, whatever. But I think what the couples say is, when they tried it the first time, they weren't really ready to have a real relationship. They let and we've all had this in our lives, they let lots of stupid things get in the way. They weren't ready to be, a real partnership. Then they go out in the world for decades. Sometimes they marry other people, they do life. And then they come back together and they still love each other. And now they can say, now we can actually make this happen. Now we're in a different place. And those are amazing. And there was a couple who sent out invitations to their wedding who said, on the invitation said something like, "The divorce failed," which I think is a really nice way to think about it. It just didn't work out,
You bring up in the book too, so we're kind of jumping around here, and I apologize to the listeners because we could go deep on each and every one of these, but there's so much good stuff in this book. I want to get to all of it. You talk about the book, individual rituals versus group rituals, and would love to hear you kind of talk a little bit about that. And then also talk about, is there a difference to our general well-being between those two?
I think when I started with ritual, I was thinking, just like everyone, I was thinking of the cultural and religious sorts of rituals that are inherited that we then practice ourselves. Again, sometimes those are incredibly important and meaningful. But when you ask people about their rituals, they do those kind, and then they do other kinds. They do kinds that they made up.
Yeah.
And that was very, very, so if you ask people, think of someone who passed away, they'll say there was, whatever faith or culture they are, they say, yes, we did that. There was a funeral. In this country, everyone wears black. In this country, everyone wears white. So the practices vary, but the funeral's there. But, funerals only last a day or 3 days or 5 days or a month, depending on your faith and on your practices. You're not done grieving.
Right.
After 1 day or 5 days or a month. That is not how grief works. And so we see when we ask people that they do these small repeated things as a different way of honoring the person who was gone. One woman really stands out. She said, I washed his car every weekend the way he used to. Devastating. I promise you, there's no 2,000-year-old text that says washing of the car because there's no cars.
Yeah.
But what is she doing? She's we don't have a lot of information, but obviously he loved that car. She loved him. She's going to keep washing the car. And that, I think, it's very individual, right?
Yeah.
There was the social group one, and then there were these individual ones. And those are the ones that I find so fascinating because people are constantly freelancing.
Yeah.
That they're not only doing the one that they got. And even, if you think about a wedding even, we can think of a wedding like a prototypical one. In all of them, people are making millions of idiosyncratic decisions that reflect who they are.
Yeah.
If they come down to AC/DC down the aisle.
Yeah.
That's also not in a 2,000-year-old book because there's no AC/DC, but maybe that's where they met, right? At an AC/DC con, whatever it might be. And so even there we have these kind of inherited traditional ones and these individual ones or ones in couples that we're coming up with. Yeah. And that really was the first insight for me, actually, is that they are often, people don't talk about them often, they do these sorts of things. But the individual ones got to be very, very rich and very, very meaningful, even without cultural history or religious history. It doesn't mean that those aren't incredibly meaningful, but again, like as a nerd, fascinating that we come up with them ourselves and imbue them with meaning.
Yeah. Does one have a bigger part in our lives than the other, or is that idiosyncratic based upon the person?
I actually don't know the answer to that. We haven't sort of looked across domains of life, in how many of them do you have some sort of ritual?
Yeah.
And what does that add up to? We haven't actually done that research. I think my hunch is that they are serving very different functions in the different domains. And so not everyone uses them in every domain, right. But my guess is if they're complete, like if you have no individual rituals ever, but 1 million group rituals, I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see versus, the exact opposite.
When that paper comes out, we'll have to get back together. So there we go.
In the back of my head, I heard like the 5th grade Sister Mary Holy Card saying, now, Michael, when you find out that answer, then you get back to us. That instant reprimand. I love the reconciliation stuff. You also, and the public grieving was a really intense part of the book. I just want to kind of give a heads up to readers. You also write about divisiveness, and you wrote one of the most powerful lines in my mind for me in recent history. You wrote, because with ritual, there are no bystanders. And that was really striking, especially in the political environment, the world that we live in. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that? And I don't want to dwell just on the negative.
Tim, finish the next sentence in it, because I think for our listeners, it makes it even more poignant. So,
because with ritual, there are no bystanders. You're either doing it right and you're with us, you're one of us, or you're wrong.
I'm very glad you asked this question for 2 reasons. One is, the book is not about how rituals are just awesome.
Yeah.
It is not a book where it's like the 7 rituals to add to your life to be super happy tomorrow. That's not what it is.
Check. Yeah.
Exactly. Clap 9 times and all your... It's not. They have risks and they have downsides, both in our individual lives and in our group lives. So I always try to emphasize that I wish it were clap 9 times.
Yeah.
I wish we had discovered that. It would be awesome. Yeah. That doesn't, maybe it is that and we haven't found it, but that doesn't tend to be how they work. But yeah, this divisiveness thing, I mean, we did research to show that like teams at work that have little rituals that they do, at lunch and starting meetings and things, they find their work more meaningful. So there's something in that. Our group rituals bond us together. Sports teams do crazy stuff before games together in unison. So we use them to bond. That is fantastic. Others have shown that, and we can show that as well. But the question is, sometimes we feel like our rituals are good. Like even with brushing my teeth and showering, I feel like it's good to do it my way.
Yeah.
But also sometimes we feel like it's right. And those are very close to each other, but the implications of them are extremely different. Because if I'm right, as you read, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happens, you get these amazing benefits of bringing us together with ritual, yet it can be making us more distant from them because they're doing different rituals. And we show that in our research as well, that even when we have groups that don't know each other, if you find out that other groups are doing a ritual differently than you trust them less.
Yeah.
Even, in a very contrived laboratory setting, think about how that plays out in the real world of distrust of them not doing it right.
Yeah. And you talk also a little bit about corporate culture, and you bring in some like information, like when you have two companies that are merging or an acquiring company, and some of all right, this could happen in that case where it could be, we do it this way and you do it that way. Our way is right. Your way is wrong. Therefore, you have some headbutting going on. But you also talk about how, sometimes you can actually use rituals to bring those two cultures together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's the mergers ended up being quite interesting because mergers happen at all different levels of analysis.
Yeah.
So sometimes countries merge, sometimes companies merge, sometimes families merge.
Yes.
And in all of those, people have turned to ritual, which again to me is like, wow, we really think these are doing something for, we really think these are a good tool.
Yeah.
But with companies or even with families that blend. So if you think about a blended family, two people get married, they have kids from a previous marriage. Now it's like the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
If the Brady Bunch were real and they actually had struggles with each other as a blended family, you see that what blended families do, if they're successful, is they take some traditions from one family and some from the other family and bring them into the new family as they also create their own new traditions.
Yeah.
And there's just fantastic stories of kids who they feel it.
Yeah.
Right. You're not saying, well, your mother is terrible and we're never going to do anything that you used to do with when we were together at all. You're saying that was a really important part of my life and your life. I want to keep some of it. And kids will say, it made me feel like a stepchild will say, it made me feel like he was my real dad.
Yeah.
That bringing it in and keeping it safe. But when you say good and bad, theirs are bad, ours are good, you're putting kids in an impossible situation. And in companies as well, right? If everyone just says, no, the way that we start meetings is the good way.
Yeah.
There's no room to do anything. But if you think about, well, is there one that we could make?
Yes.
How can we pull from both and create something new? It's not easy. I don't mean like, this just takes 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But conceptually speaking,
Right.
It does seem like this pulling and creating new at the same time can be really powerful.
It's interesting. So I've been doing, I do a lot of work with different companies and corporations, and working one with Now, it was an acquired company and various different things. And we had this first meeting where everybody came together, and they were calling this the best of both. And I actually changed it. I actually changed it though. And I wanted to get your thought on this to the best of us.
Love it.
So just that little nuance of saying, all right, it's not your stuff and our stuff. It's our stuff, it's our stuff together. And I don't know if there's any, how much of a difference that will make. But, I think it's, as you were talking about, it's looking to find those shared new rituals as well as keeping the ones that work from the old, from both sides. So.
For sure. And some matter a lot to people and some don't.
Yeah.
You see very quickly by the way, sometimes people are like, you know what? I hated that one. You know what I mean? I had this manager, they made us stretch at the beginning of every meeting.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Yeah.
Can we leave that behind? So there can be a culling in addition to creating and merging.
So to that degree, Kurt has been, just described, he's been doing workshops with corporate entities for dozens of years, dozens and dozens and dozens of years.
Not quite that many. I'm not that old.
When GE was founded, Kurt was on the ground.
Back when Thomas Edison was just developed. Yeah. So
back when Jesus walked the earth, I was there. Yeah, not quite. Yeah.
So one of the things that, and I've helped Kurt with this, is trust falls. Do they work?
You couldn't get a bigger eye roll from employees if you say corporate retreat and then follow that up with, and what we're going to do is like a trust fall or a ropes course.
Or ropes course. That's the other one. Right.
People just, oh my God, I can't believe this. Very, very commonly what employees will say is like, oh, we have this one manager, and what they do is over the weekend, they see some TED talk or they hear some podcast and they come in and they say, oh, this is how we have to do everything now, whatever. And of course they hate this person because it's new every week, but that's a different problem. But yeah, I mean, there's a funny part of that, which is when the manager's doing that or the company says corporate retreat, there's the eye roll. Everyone's doing it in unison, though. So they're actually bonding. I mean, in a funny way, we're bonding against. So you are weirdly getting, in the reaction to, you are getting bonding. That's not really what the company's going for. I mean, they're going for that, but they don't want the hatred part on the other end, speaking of divisiveness. But we do see, in fact, that when people, I mean, again, for me, it's always a question of compared to what?
Yeah.
So if you work at a company and you never, ever see each other outside of work, is that better than going on a corporate retreat where everybody kind of grumbles, but you will have some laughs? And a trust fall is a funny one, right? Because it's the cheesiest, most overused thing.
Yep.
And yet the trust fall is I have to close my eyes and fall and trust that my coworkers will catch me.
Yeah.
And guess what? They did. And then I caught them.
Yeah.
And again, compared to doing nothing at all, it feels to me like those things, even as you're laughing and grumbling, those things can have a positive impact on bringing us together as a team or as a company rather than just, here's your paycheck, go home.
Yeah. One thing that you said at the beginning of that is that I want to just tell our listeners. So managers that are listening, don't go out and just start implementing rituals next week after you listen to this, because last week and you listened to asking questions and don't, it's changing it up. But sorry, I digress. What is it about the way that rituals bring us together? Because I think what you're talking about here, and trust fall being as crazy as it is, but if I'm in an organization, what is it about the rituals that bring us together that help with that? I mean, why should we care? Again, it's at work. I mean, I do my job, you do your job. What does it matter?
When we ask teams at work, in the same way we ask couples or families, is there anything that you do that's kind of special and you make sure to do it and other teams don't do it? Not every team has them, but many teams do have something. I don't know why this team always stands out to me. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but this team where they each were responsible for lunch on one day of the week. Mm. So like I had Monday, you had Tuesday, you had Wednesday, and it's lunch. Yeah. I mean, it's like brushing your teeth and showering. It's just food going in your face. But what are they doing with that? Well, each person's taking care of the entire team one day per week and then being taken care of by other people on the team all the other days of the week. That's very meaningful and powerful, actually. It is not one where the manager said, you must get lunch on Monday for everybody, right? It came from bottom up. They decided to do this. And again, teams that have practices like that say they find their work more meaningful. And a little bit what it looks like is the practice itself has meaning, and that meaning can then carry over a bit to the work that you're doing. Because in the end, all of us, a job at its very basic function, no matter what it is extremely boring. You know what I mean? This is a very fun conversation we're having, but we could also define it as shooting words out of our face.
That's right.
My God, how much longer I have to shoot words out of my face? But it's not what we're doing. So we have some flexibility in bringing meaning to the work that we're doing. And we can do it in all kinds of, work at a company that does something that reflects your values. It's not that rituals, of course, are the only way to get meaning in your work, but we do see this link when we ask employees between having things like this with your team and feeling like there's any meaning at all in what you're going to do at that day at work.
Do you still love your small stone sculpture?
I still have it.
Do you have it handy? Can you show us?
No, I actually don't have it. It's in my home office.
Oh,
unfortunately,
okay.
I'm at work right now, okay. But it's there. But it's hidden because it's so ugly. So I would have to pull it. So, but yeah. So I mean, this is when everybody knows the phrase "me search," of course, obviously. But I took a stone carving class with some friends in graduate school, actually. So like 100 years ago now. And one of them was extremely talented and made this had never, carved stone before, made this like amazingly beautiful, figure. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm still jealous. I made something that just looked terrible. I mean, it really is just terrible looking thing. Poorly designed, poorly executed. By the way, I really worked hard on it.
Yeah.
I want to say it's not like I half-assed it and it was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, I'm give me all the tools. And it was just terrible. And yet I kept it with me and kept it with me and kept it with me and moved and kept it with me. And that led to this little insight of, I wonder if when we make things ourselves, we come to attach special meaning to them. And then if you ask people, or you ask people's partners or spouses, does your partner or spouse have something that they made a while ago that's hideous that they insist on keeping? And they're like, yeah, actually, he did this watercolor in college that's so ugly, but always wants it to be like in the kitchen where everyone can see it, or a bookshelf, or, whatever it is that you made. And I think there is in that this idea. On the one hand, it's silly. I mean, the sculpture I made is terrible.
Yeah.
So it's a mistake that I have, this, and yet it's great, right?
Yeah.
I can imbue this it's just a boring object, but I can imbue it through my own effort with a lot of meaning and a lot of satisfaction, and keep having that for years and years and years. It's like a wonderful gift that we're able to do this, to create so much meaning in things that are literally a block of stone.
We are talking with Mike Norton about his new book, The Ritual Effect, and it's noteworthy that you have a lot of really wonderful musical references in the book. You got Kenny Rogers and the band, and Buddy Holly, and Kurt Cobain, and Johnny Mathis, and Gillian Welch, and Ben Folds. I love the variety.
Wait. In the list of, why would you lead with Kenny Rogers?
Because
of incredibly talented.
Once, twice, three times a lady?
It just seems like an odd.
Oh, I love that, Mike.
Fair enough. You also mentioned the Harvard faculty band, The Lights. Yeah. Okay, so just curious, any of these artists sort of your favorite artists other than Kenny Rogers? Yeah.
I often pull quotes. So, I mean, in my mind, musicians and comedians are the best social scientists in the world. If they're very good, they're much better than me. They're much better than most of us who have been working at this craft, because their observational abilities are so profound and their insight into the human psyche can be so profound. It's just a musician sees something or notices themselves, turns it into a song. Comedians turn it into a bit, and we turn it into an incredibly boring paper that nobody will ever read. It's very confusing why we chose that path, but that is what we do. Yeah. But one of the chapters on self-control, the quote from Gillian Welch is, I want to do right, but not right now.
Yeah.
Like, could you write a better, a more perfect in that few words to sum up the human condition? I mean, that is extraordinary as a lyric. I love her music as well, but even if you don't, if you ever tried to write lyrics, you go, oh God, you're so jealous, of that.
Yeah.
So, I do think that music is a big part of it. I do try sometimes to not produce a boring paper, but try to write a song. I've been much, much less successful on the songwriting route than on the boring paper route, sadly for my ego. But those germs are there as well. And we called it the faculty band. Two of my colleagues at HBS are in the band, as well as one of their husbands and a friend of ours. And playing music is one of the most ritualistic things that humans do, because you cannot make it without each other. You can't. You just can't. You have to all be doing the things in order to make it. And that is a very deep, it's like a profound connect. It's like Other things like that are making a baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You need two things in order to make a baby. You can't do it. You know what I mean? So these things, I think, it isn't synchrony in a band, right? We're not, although that happens, we're all hitting drums at the same time, for example, but we're creating something and each of us is adding our own part to it. That's like the word religious usually means like religion, but I think a religious experience is something that sort of is elevating more generally. And music is one of the ways that humans always, like thousands of years, always have turned to music to be part of their rituals and often to bring people together.
It's interesting to me because as you talked about that, what struck me is a couple things. One is there's a ritual aspect of going to see music. I'm not a musician. So you and Tim obviously, are musicians and you can do that part, but there is a ritual aspect of actually going and watching live music happen. And then you just even said at the end there's music is embedded in so many of those cultural rituals that we have, right? And I think about, the Christmas songs that we sing, as
Johnny Mathis.
Yeah, there you
Christmas
go.
album.
Or even, in services at weddings or in a religious service, there is always a musical component to it. Is there, and again, maybe you don't have the research on this, but what is it that brings that part? Is there something just innate about the music itself and how it impacts us? Maybe it's an unanswerable question at this point, but I don't know if you have any insight.
I think it's so fascinating. If you think about the rituals that we have that are handed down in one way or another, it is the case that someone at some point or a couple of people were like, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
With the color in different countries for funerals. Mm-hmm. At different points, groups of humans said, hey, we should do something. This person died. We're grieving. We should do something. And they said, well, let's use color. And then from there, it could be any color.
Yeah.
And music is the same. At some point, someone said, hey, we should have a song. When we get married, we should have a song. Why don't we have a song in there?
Yeah.
Somebody did that for the first time.
Right? Yeah.
And now, it could have been thousands of years ago, for example. And so it is interesting to me that even the ones that are inherited with long tradition, at some point, it was people who decided, let's include music. Music is like huge, and also food and drink.
Yeah.
We put food and drink in everything whenever we can. We use it in every single ritual. Has food, drink, and music in one way. I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
But, you really see us pulling from culture and from what's around us to build these rituals that have meaning for us.
All right. So I'm just going to, Tim has a question I know he's dying to ask you, but there's just one thing. You said that and you were talking about food and drink, and I immediately went to Thanksgiving in America, right? Thanksgiving. And I'm going, well, there's no song there. But then I'm going, well, Alice's Restaurant, like my wife and I, like we have to, it's like, It's the Thanksgiving song now for us. And I just realized that again, we embedded the musical part when it didn't have it, because there you go. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the government said, everyone has to listen to Alice's Restaurant on Thanksgiving. It emerged, right? It came from us to say, why don't we listen to this long, meandering song that we would never listen to on any other day?
Yeah, I could see the government trying to mandate Arlo Guthrie, down to the people. Not quite there, but yeah. All right.
Under the category of you learn something new about the guy that you've just done 400 plus episodes with every day. That's fantastic. If you were isolated on a desert island, Mike, for a year, what two musical artist catalogs would you take with you?
Wow, that is so painful.
No, it's not a go to the grave question, by the way. Take it easy here. Just breathe.
For sure. The band has always been one of my touchstones, in part to what we were talking about earlier, is that they actually play as a band.
They are,
it's in the service of the music. And I always really admired that. So for sure, the band and the vocal. Anyway, we could go on. I could go on and on about the band. For sure, the band. And then I think I would have to go with the Beatles, even though that's a consensus choice, because there's so much in there that I think I would miss if I couldn't have access to those to those songs.
So just out of curiosity with the band, I feel like it is an amazing collection of very different people. You know, I mean, it feels like Rick Danko couldn't be any more different than Robbie Robertson, you know, for me. But is there someone's, you mentioned voice, is there a voice in the band that really stands out? You
It's
know,
Levon Helm.
It's Levon Helm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Levon, I went to college in Western Massachusetts, and they lived in around Woodstock, New York, as it turns out. So they used to play in the late 90s, like random buildings in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The Reformed band used to play there. So I used to go and see them all the time, actually. It was amazing to see them. And Levon was always the one who just grabbed us. Like, the coolest thing ever in my entire life was my girlfriend at the time went up to him and was like, hey, can I have your drumsticks for my boyfriend? Because I was too intimidated to go up to him. So he gave them to her. And then he goes, hey, you know what? We have cake. There's cake for the band. Let me get you guys a piece. And no joke, Levon Helm went and got cake for us to have some cake. Levon Helm, you know what I mean? I mean, if you don't know him, you know his voice. You have heard his voice in your life for sure, and it struck you. But that kind of humility, I think, in the music, it's in the music, in the way that they approach, maybe not Robbie Robertson, but the rest of them in the way that they approach it. But in him as a person as well, you know.
Take a load off Annie. You know, the weight just wouldn't be the same without Levon singing it. So
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
Mike Norton. What a treat it is to have you as a guest. Thank you for being a guest on Behavior Grooves.
Thank you both. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Mike, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our ritualistic brains. Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Digging the ritual.
So, all right, we were just talking about this, but before we record the grooving piece every time, I almost always do this little grooving, keep them doggies grooving, which is
for people who
don't
know, is Rawhide, the song Rawhide.
The Rawhide take.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a thing where it's like interesting, because it's something that I do, and I'm not fully off if we don't. We've been focused. I mean, there's like the last few weeks, for whatever reason, we've kind of have focused on, and all right, don't do this. But, you know, it's kind of interesting. I mean, is that, or like again, at the intro, we talk about sitting back with our warm drink or whatever. We just made that up at the beginning, and somehow it's stuck. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know. I don't remember.
But if we didn't do that, I think it would feel off.
Right now, it would. It would. So maybe that has gone from habit to ritual, because it would be odd to end an introduction without a warm cup or a strong pour or something.
I don't know. Yeah.
It's a good question.
Which I think goes to Mike's point, is that rituals are not just these elaborate, as we talked about, incense burning type, religious rituals, that they can be the small things in our lives. And I think that's really important.
It is important. And our everyday lives sometimes include rituals, and those rituals are important. Yeah. It's okay to have things in our lives that we do for a particular reason, in a particular order. You know, the cultural side of it, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, culturals wearing white to demonstrate some kind of mourning versus wearing black or any kind of color to demonstrate mourning. And it's an important way of just fitting in, you know. I think that those are really good things for us to be aware of. You mentioned the birthday song in the introduction.
Yeah.
In the United States, the birthday song is a really big deal. Katie and I were in Bali and we're celebrating her birthday. And the staff at the resort that we were staying in came and brought her a cake and they sang in English the birthday song.
Yeah.
And it was really comforting. It was really super comforting to have that experience. It absolutely gave an animation to our life, as Mike would say.
I love that there's a meaning associated with it. And if we didn't do it, like, again, the brushing the teeth in that order and that research, I think is just fascinating. Again, seems minuscule, and yet for some portion of the population, it's not. And that is another very interesting piece, is that the exact same thing, the same behavior can be very different for two people.
Yeah, right. The toothbrushing thing is a great example. Mike continued to go back to this idea of looking down on a church, especially a Catholic church, but pretty much any kind of religious experience. Yeah. People are standing, then they're sitting, then they're kneeling, then they're standing, then they're kneeling, then they're sitting, then they're standing, and they're all doing it in sequence. And for some people, it's adding great meaning and value to their lives. And for other people, they're just doing it because their partner told them to do it. Yeah. And I think that it's a great reminder. Andy Luttrell, I remember having a conversation with him about some people are vegetarians because it's like a meaningful social thing. Like they're making some kind of a protest or a social stance by not eating meat. And some people are just allergic to meat, or they don't like the taste.
They don't like meat. Yeah. And so, if you, and the thing is that we embed meaning because of other people's behavior. So we're assuming if it's a ritual for us, that it's probably a ritual for them. What's that called? There's a scientific component of, it's not pluralistic ignorance, which is different. That's that idea that, I'm changing my behavior because I think everybody else has, wants this piece. Anyway, the implication though is that these rituals that we have, and Mike talked about this really, I thought this was a really great part of the book, but also our conversation is that when we are in a relationship and one person thinks that this is a ritual and the other person does not,
that's trouble.
That can be trouble. Mm-hmm. And again, we make assumptions about meaning because of what we see. And, we can't read minds, at least I can't, as much as I try. I can't. Although that is one of the most isn't that one of the most popular superpowers that people want to have, like flying and then reading people's minds, something like that? Yeah. Anyway, so I just think it's really fascinating when you think about those ritual aspects and the meaning that we ascribe to them, but then also this fact of we assume others are in there, which gets into some of the positive things of it, but also some of the negative.
So you and your family listen to Alice's Restaurant every Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. Alice's Restaurant, by the way, is a 18-minute song by Arlo Guthrie. And you said that you do it. Is it a ritual? Would Thanksgiving be off, like for you or for anyone in your family? Would it be like, ooh, this is not a good Thanksgiving without listening to Alice's Restaurant?
I don't know if it would be off, but it adds. It's adds additive. Something. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Are you a Alice's Restaurant?
I learned the song when I was like 14 years old.
Woohoo!
And because it's 18 minutes long, it's just got a lot of words. It's a long story.
It is.
And my dad was fascinated by the fact that I memorized all these words. And so he wanted to roll me out and parade me in front of the whole family and everyone had to sit down and listen to me do it, which lasted 1 year. And then pretty much everybody was heading for the hills after that.
So the ritual was to leave when Tim got out his guitar.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. The ritual became,
my life will be much better if I leave.
Exactly.
I will have meaning that I won't have to put up with Tim and singing Arlo Guthrie for 18 minutes and talking about the garbage and the recruiters and
the Group W bench, and yes, yeah, all of that. Yeah, okay, that's
to go back to this piece though that we were talking about. Like rituals have positive impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of positive aspects of it, and they make things good until they don't.
Yeah. I still am just so fascinated by that quote that what Mike wrote, because with ritual, there are no bystanders. You're either doing it right and you're one of us, or you're wrong.
You're wrong. It's not just you have a different ritual or don't, and you're wrong.
You're wrong, right?
Because rituals have that meaning, right? Because they embody something that is more than just a habit or a routine. Oh, you get up and you brush your teeth before you shower. Oh, you get up and brush your teeth after you shower, right? And again, maybe not so much there, but rituals do have this component of like, no, that's not the way that you do it. You do it this way.
How about folding your clothes? How about the way your clothes are folded or hung in your closet?
Or not hung at all. Like
or not hung at all.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. We can get really sensitive about that stuff. And really, it's kind of silly when we stop and think about it, when we zoom out a bit. Isn't it just a little bit too much to think that if we're doing something differently than someone else, that one person is wrong? I think that's just a little too judgmental, that it doesn't necessarily, we don't need to live in a world that is that judgmental.
And the fact of the matter is, though, is that many of those larger rituals do embody that, right? And so interestingly, and, as most people understand, I'm kind of more on the left of the political process here, but I was at a Timberwolves game just the other day. And
professional basketball team
in Minnesota. And at the beginning of every game, they play the national anthem. Again, don't know why. Don't necessarily think that like the national anthem is really like, why is it always associated with sporting events and various different things? Regardless, people stand, they take their caps off, they pay respect. Two people that were new people that sitting next to me did not stand during the national anthem.
Oh.
And there was, and again, there's been a whole component within like professional players kneeling during the national anthem and various different things. And there's all sorts of things, which I agree with. I think that's a positive thing, right? They're doing it. But like, there was a visceral response that I had to them not standing.
Really? Wow.
It was like, this is, you might disagree, but show some respect. And I'm like, oh no, like, what am I thinking? Like, it is this, like, it's a ritual and they're doing it wrong. And it bothered me for some reason, which is like, I have to think about that because it's like, I don't know why they weren't. I mean, it wasn't because they couldn't stand, because they were standing when the Timberwolves players were announced and they stood for other things. They just didn't stand for that.
Well, as my grandmother would say, it's time to get off your high horse there, Mr. Nelson.
It is a high horse. And I feel there's like, I have to contemplate like my emotions around that because God, I don't want to be one of those people, So there you go.
And yet it's hard. We have to be intentional. We have to be thoughtful. It takes energy. It gets us out of our habit loop to not be intentional at a time when someone is doing the wrong thing in a ritual.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to that, from that to I think probably your favorite part of this, which is about songwriters seeing the human psyche better than most.
Yes. And thank you for correcting me in the introduction.
You knew that you were just going.
I do.
You had the same intent. It was the same thing. We're just from only to the best, right? There you go.
Yes. Mike it's a clever and insightful thing to think about, that there are certain roles that people take on and certain ways that we can look at the world that give us some insight into human psychology, right? And musicians and comedians are people who are good observers. And I think the thing about musicians and comedians is that they boil those observations down into very short stories, typically.
Yes. And ones that, I mean, the good songwriters and the good comedians capture that moment in a way that we all go, yeah, that's it.
Instantly.
Right?
Yeah.
And we are able to, it's like sometimes, again, George Carlin, like from a comedian perspective, was fantastic in being able to take some of the absurdities of that we, again, talking about, habits where we can just overlook things like we talked about with Zinn and Norm, and in that episode about being on autopilot, right? And we overlook them. But, again, singers and comedians and songwriters and comedians have a way of picking that out from the noise and just saying, hold a spotlight to it and show it and say, look at this. Why are you behaving this way? And oftentimes it's around love and other pieces, but man, it can just be about just general things in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm grateful for it. I'm glad to be able to kind of look at the world that way.
I think we can wrap it up there. I loved having the conversation with Mike. Totally fun. Love talking with him. Sarcastic and fresh and fun and laughing. And, Mike, if you're listening to this, we got to go have a beer sometime or just some drink. We got to have that big pour of ritualistic something. There you go.
I agree. It was a terrific conversation. Loved it. And we're really grateful to be able to have such fun conversations and to bring those conversations to our listeners. I think it's just a really, really cool thing that we get to do that.
Yeah. And thanks for listening. And again, as we ask all the time, if you enjoy this, we would love for you to rate us on your podcast app or do whatever, or just drop us a line. Maybe we would like you too, and we can have a deep pour of ritualistic beer with you. We'd love to be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we hope that our conversation with Mike Norton and the impact that rituals have on our lives and how we can embed them into our week will help you go out and find your groove.